Dr. Carmella Franco has dedicated 38 years to education, including serving more than 12 years as the superintendent of the Whittier School District, followed by several interim superintendent roles. She also served as a state trustee appointed by the California State Board of Education to oversee an academically failing school district in Monterey County, and is currently a governance consultant working with boards and superintendents. Dr. Maria Ott has served as an educator for more than 40 years, including 14 years as a superintendent and 5 years as the senior deputy superintendent in the Los Angeles Unified School District. She now holds the Irving R. and Virginia A. Melbo Chair in Education Administration at the University of Southern California Rossier School of Education. Dr. Darline Robles is the Associate Dean of the Office of Equity and Community Engagement and a Professor of Clinical Education at the Rossier School of Education. Prior to joining the faculty at Rossier, Dr. Robles served 8 years as the first Latina County Superintendent of Schools with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Carmella, Maria, and Darline first shared their insights as superintendents committed to advancing equity in their first book, A Culturally Proficient Society Begins in School, published by Corwin in 2011. They have continued to work together since then to support educators across the country to serve all students. We're honored to publish their follow-up book and to hear from them today. Thank you all so much for being here.
And now we're going to talk about our why. Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today on this Corwin webinar. Again, I'm Carmella Franco. Before sharing my why, I'd like to thank everyone who played a part in making our book a reality. From Randy and Dolores Lindsay, Stephanie Graham, the fabulous Corwin team with Melissa leading that there, and then especially Dan Albert. Thank you so much. And now my why. For me, the timing was perfect. So much had occurred during the past decade that when we wrote our first books, so many things had changed, the conditions that the schools were in. It just was perfect timing. One only needs to read the news to see that equity issues are occurring on a daily basis. School districts are in the news like never before. Boards of education are standing prime on news. There is the aftermath of so much that has emerged vociferously in the wake of the pandemic. Every administrative decision is subject to political scrutiny, derision, unbelievable demands. In fact, equity has become a four-letter word in many places. It was very clear that there was a great deal more to share and to provide guidance to those in the trenches fighting the fight for equity. My colleagues and I will share several key areas as the webinar progresses. The book now also was a way to leave a legacy for current and future leaders, that obstacles and barriers can be overcome, that the difficult and uncomfortable conversations about ugly situations can be held, must be held, that there is hope for those on their leadership journey for improving the lot for students. I know I went through all of that and want to support you in your journey. I've always believed that everything I did as an educator, from my time in the classroom as a classroom teacher to the central office as a superintendent, was for the students. My why for writing this book had that unwavering belief as its foundation and motivation.
Thank you, Carmella. I'm Maria Ott, and I also joined my colleagues in welcoming all of you and expressing our appreciation for you being present today. And I'm grateful to share my why with all of you. My why is a circle of protection and inclusion for every child so they can thrive in our schools with educators that value their uniqueness and love them for who they are. Our democracy is rooted in beliefs and values of acceptance, caring, and opportunity. My commitment is to every child, that every child has the opportunity to experience education that is inclusive. This book and my why are about empowering educators to help children reach their potential. I hope that children see themselves as supported and nurtured by educators who use their experiences and expertise to open the door of opportunity. We guide children to take their best selves forward into a future that welcomes their contributions. This happens only when we are intentional and willing to change. Change is an inside-out process that begins with knowing ourselves and acknowledging our strengths and weaknesses. As we change, we can bring others along to help with the work of student success. Think of a gift box wrapped for the holidays, beautiful paper on the outside. You open the box and it holds a kaleidoscope. You look into the kaleidoscope and you see beautiful shapes and colors. You see an infinity of possibilities. That is my why. I hope to share that why with everyone willing to join me in this equity journey. Together, we can become the equity warriors that lead lasting change for our schools, communities, and most importantly, our children.
Thank you, Maria. I'm Darline Robles, and I also want to echo the comments of my colleagues saying thank you to everyone who was part of our book, and also for those of you who have joined us from as far away as Bogota, Colombia. Thank you for being here. I love being asked to share my why, because it ties into why this book has such meaning for me and for my colleagues as well. But the reason I like thinking about my why is because it forces me to be reflective on why I do the things I do, as well as when I may be out of sync with my why. As often when I've reflected on my life as a daughter, sister, wife, mother, friend, student, an educator for over 40 years, superintendent for over 20 years, I have learned over time that all my lived experiences in my many identities as a child and student, and as I said, 40 years in my career, my why, I've noticed, has been consistent. Though often I did not name it early in life or early in my career, but as I reflect back, I see it in the actions I took. This is what I've learned has driven me to do the things I do. It gives me purpose to serve others in my family, my community, my students, past and present, and those that I've supervised and worked with through my career. I want them to all be able to choose to be and want to be, and is important to be seen. It's serving them that gives me purpose. My work has been devoted in serving others to ensure they have what they need to be their authentic selves and to find their own purpose. As an administrator and as a leader, my why has been demonstrated by building the capacity of all whom I work with to support them in their work, to be engaged in community with each other, to be respectful and caring, so they can, again, be who they are all day, every day. My why also includes placing the well-being of everyone that is at the center of my why. Thank you for joining us today.
You're muted, Carmella.
I will be covering the Cultural Proficiency Leadership Rubric. In writing now, what my co-authors, Maria, Darline, and I wanted to make sure that the Cultural Proficiency Leadership Rubric was a signature piece of the book, and we believe it definitely is. It spans 9 pages in chapter 3, but serves as a foundation throughout the book. I'll refer to it as Leadership Rubric as a shortcut going forward. The Leadership Rubric was designed to be a roadmap for looking at the status of equity in an organization, be it a school, a district, or another agency. Next. In looking at the structure, it's comprised of 6 cultural proficiency framework columns across the top and 5 rubric elements along the left-hand side. And I'll show you a pic in a moment. In effect, it's comprised of rows and columns, and then it has cells that form the body of the rubric that are filled with descriptive examples. Next. So there are 2 major tools to the rubric. One is the culturally proficient framework, the continuum, and you can see the 6 major points there: destructiveness and capacity, blindness, pre-competence, competence, and proficiency. Next. And those 6 points move from one state to another. It's a model for change that provides specific descriptors of unhealthy and healthy values, behaviors, practices, and policies for organizations on their journey to cultural proficiency. The first 3 that you saw are unhealthy, and the next 3 are on the healthy spectrum. The second tool, as shown on the screen there, is the leadership rubric. That is comprised of 5 elements. They're the 5 standards of practice that help us understand how to think and act as we progress along the 6 points of the continuum. And you can see there, they hit on everything. Next. So here's a micro version of the rubric. It's from the first page, actually, in the book that portrays that. And you may need a microscope to look at it, but I'm going to cover some pieces with you. So this first one is on assessing culture, one's own and one's other. So the extent to which the leader uses personal experience to develop, maintain, and provoke a moral imperative. And there's other writing there, as you can see, but that's the major thought of it there. And if you proceed along the top column, and let's stop at the second one, cultural incapacity. That's the second one on the framework that you saw 2 pages earlier. So leaders tolerate diversity in schools, but believe that the perspectives and attributes of the dominant culture are superior to those of other culture. And this belief justifies policies and practices that maintain the status quo and benefit those who reflect the attributes of the dominant culture. And so remember, so that is in the unhealthy part there, those 3, destructiveness, incapacity, and blindness. So we enter the healthy part of the continuum, and let's look at the 5th one, cultural competence. Here it says, leaders are compassionate, diligent, and skilled professionals whose experiences have led to a profound understanding of long-term systemic educational inequity. And this understanding compels a relentless, fervent, professional, and personal commitment to challenge and break down barriers. So you can just see from the language there how it progresses along. Not showing there, but another the elements is on the left is managing the dynamics of difference. And this is the extent to which the leader solicits diverse points of view, opinions, learning, communication, and leadership styles to promote flexibility in meeting organizational goals and to make decisions that reflect stakeholder issues. On this one, as you look at the top headings, we'll look at cultural destructiveness. Under this element, leaders make unilateral authoritarian decisions with little or no input about stakeholder needs. Leaders may solicit particular perspectives to justify decisions or to withhold or deny program services or resources to some stakeholders. Very unfair. And then on this one, let's jump to the fourth heading of cultural pre-competence. So here, beginning that healthy route. Leaders may consider input from majority stakeholder groups and or one or few minority stakeholder groups, depending on which stakeholders proactively assert their ideas and opinions. I have personally seen that occur many times recently in situations that I'm working with. And so the next slide. Okay. So certain examples were selected to highlight the 6-column continuum, as you saw. And we encourage you to identify your own situations, policies, or behaviors that might fit into various cells. And that those are the cells that make up the body of the rubric. You can make this rubric your own. The ideal is to reach that 6th column, cultural proficiency. However, if you can get your organization to cultural competence, that is a tremendous accomplishment, and you would be recognized for doing so. So reflect for a minute about an equity issue you are currently addressing and just jot it down for yourself. Is it toxic, unhealthy, a horrible situation? Or is it healthy pre-competence? And yet you find yourself stalled at what to do or look for in moving forward. Perhaps you're thinking, I'd like to address the situation. Well, you can. You can begin this work on your own or with a small committed group. It can be your leadership team, cabinet, department chairs, or grade levels. And so here you see the leadership rubric and its uses. Again, it helps us assess our performance and progress against a standard. And in this regard, our rubric does two things. It helps us see where we are and where we want to go on that cultural proficiency journey. And it helps us know how difficult the work will be. And that's straight out of our book, page 26 there. Last slide. So we believe our book will guide you through the process of using the cultural proficiency leadership rubric. It will help you determine the course for your organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmella. I know that everyone who's in this webinar with us values that tool, that leadership rubric. So it's my pleasure to talk to you about why we need an equity plan. You know, the work of leading equity in your schools or your districts or the organizations that you are a member of requires clarity in terms of how you move forward. I'm always amazed. I teach leadership and oversee a leadership course. I'm always amazed at how many organizations do not have plans really to accomplish the goals they set. So it's easy to have rhetoric to say, you know, these are things we value, but without a plan, you're not going to make the progress you need. And having a plan means really taking the time to get people involved with you. You know, a plan has to reflect the various important groups that represent the work that you have to accomplish. So it means, you know, establishing those groups in a meaningful way. So let me give you an example. When I was superintendent, my last district, we were doing this work so intentionally. And so part of what needed to happen was really to create a plan that would move the district forward. And I could not create that plan with just my executive cabinet. That plan needed to reflect the voices of the system. So we took a year. We took a year to develop that plan. And the people involved were students, high school students, teachers, administrators, but we also had parents from the different parts of the school district. We had a very diverse community. We had parents representing that diversity. We had community leaders who represented organizations that were partners in some cases. In other cases, they were organizations that influenced the community. And we did that work together. We met weekly, if you can imagine. We made it special. There was always a meal at the end of our meeting that made people know how much we valued their participation. But together, we established really clear goals for the district. It became the plan to guide our work forward. And one of the things that I will share with you was that we were so committed that it not be just something you hang on the wall that was a nice phrase, but that was really reflective of everything we were doing, our intentionality, our commitment, our clarity of focus. So just as a small little piece, the business card for everybody in the organization had on it that we are a district committed to being culturally proficient. We will be a culturally proficient school district. And, you know, that was the work we did together. And I will just share with you the importance of having people work with you and be involved, and to have as inclusive a process as possible, that you have those various voices there and that you can integrate that into all aspects of the work in your districts. It sounds very straightforward, but as all of you know, it's the details of making that happen. It's the investment of quality time. It's having the right people in the room to take that journey with you in creating the plan. If you don't have a plan, I always say this to my students, how do you know where you're going, right? You have to have a plan. The plan is, in a sense, you know, what opens up the possibilities that you as a leader alone cannot do. You can't do that work of bringing in all those perspectives, all those ideas, all of the energy that when you pull people together across their various roles within your system, it's powerful. So just think about that. What do you have currently as your plan? And does that plan reflect your equity work, your commitment to equity? And if it needs additional development, how might you go about doing that? Do you need to revisit that plan? Because sometimes people will do something that I think is not maybe as helpful as they might initially think. Like they'll develop their plan for their school district, a strategic plan, and then they'll develop their equity plan. When those two are walking side by side, they're two roads, they're not intersecting. You need to really be intentional in making sure that the plan for your district has the equity work woven throughout it, that it's very clear in terms of what you're working to accomplish. So in that plan, you know, we always start with the vision and mission, and I'm hoping that all of you have that in your current plans. I will tell you that to create the vision, I worked with the elected officials in my district, and we spent 2 whole days working on the vision. Every single word that was in that vision was thought of very carefully in terms of how we would be reflecting our commitment to the public. The mission we worked on with a very diverse group of individuals, and we had several sessions, starting with an all-day session to accomplish that. So it's exciting work, but it's also really intentional work. It does include analyzing the data that you have about your students and issues around performance, issues around discipline practices, issues around the accomplishments of your various groups. Are they advancing? Are they achieving the goals that you have envisioned for them? And where they're not, what are the root causes? And there you have to be very honest with yourself and with the system in terms of looking at what are the potential underlying root causes for what you're seeing as it involves students within your district. When you look at our book, you're going to see some examples of that. But they serve only as examples. The more powerful work is what you do within your own system. And then once you have done that, really taking that look at where do we start? What are the priority areas that we need to address? And one of the cautions I would have for you is that you can't address everything at the same time. So the ability to prioritize and decide what are the first steps is really, really crucial. So starting with those priority areas, then establishing timelines. How are you going to get there? Our plan was a multi-year. The first plan had 5 years in it, and there were very specific steps. And I'll tell you, as a superintendent, I was held accountable for that, and not only by the elected officials who were my boss, but also by the people in the system, because we were communicating this out. And so people were asking, how are we progressing? And identifying people who are going to work with you. Who are the key leaders? They're not always members of your cabinet, maybe other individuals, either in the community that are within your school sites that can help advance the work. And then the communication strategies are absolutely essential. Having clarity about how you're going to communicate the work to the public, and being, again, intentional. I will tell you, everywhere that I went as a leader in the system, I was communicating that, whether it was to a chamber of commerce, to a service group, whether it was at a school function, at a community event, I was the key spokesperson. But what was beautiful was that everyone else was also key spokespersons for this. They would also replicate and join me in being good communicators of the work. And so the challenges, you're going to identify those, but along with those challenges, you're going to also identify solutions, because that is absolutely essential for people to be optimistic about where you're going. This is hard work. It's not easy work, but it's the most gratifying work that I have ever done, is doing the work of creating a plan, living that plan, advancing that plan, and working with so many diverse groups who joined me in the work. And ultimately, you see the impact on a community. It changes the community in a very positive way. So I just encourage you to, be patient with yourselves. Don't take the journey alone. Make sure that you bring others along with you, including your students, because they're an important ingredient in a successful accomplishment of the goals that you set. And then one thing I want to stress with all of you is that you have to take time to celebrate. And this is our advice to you, celebrate progress, because change is difficult. Celebrating the progress you've made helps build that trust, and it promotes collaboration. This has got to be a team effort, not a single effort. You've got to bring others along on the journey with you. And it's all about the future of the students that you serve. And these are the individuals who rely on you to be successful in this work. And we as authors are committed to supporting you in that success. We know that you, as you move forward and spread the impact of having systems that work well for students, that are diverse, that you are helping the future of education. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Darline.
Thank you. This is a very, very loud slide. Now is the time. As you heard from the authors and my colleagues about our why and why we wrote the book. And honestly, in 2011, the best way for me to describe I'll just speak for myself of where we are. I think we were too politically correct. We didn't want to upset any carts. We were very, just leaving our superintendency, and we had done the work, as Maria shared, my own work in Salt Lake City for 8 years, culturally proficient community by the time I left. But I think when we realized over the last couple of years, the things that we have faced, the racial reckoning our country has gone through, the light shown on the disparities in our country from the pandemic, we as educators have known the disparities, but I think broader communities did not know the lack of shelter, the lack of food, the lack of internet access for our students, all the things that we struggled to make sure that they all had what they needed. And so that was really a time to say, now, wait a minute, now what's going on here? And so we believed when we started writing this book that we needed to be more assertive in our actions to improve the conditions in our schools so that students who had not been served well by the system, and we know there are many that haven't, that they must be our priority. And they have to be our priority if we're really going to have an equity lens facing us and making sure that those students get what they need to be academically successful. Slide 2, please. So to do this, we believe we need to be intentional in our conditions because to see conditions differently, to create new opportunities for students. I love this quote by Audre Lorde. And I love it because it really talks about how if we're going to really change something, we have to see it differently than we've seen it. You all have heard that line about if you always do what you've always done and expect a different outcome, then you probably belong in an insane asylum. I'll just be that crude. But the reality is that we really have to look at things differently. And she states true change can only be realized when we engage in an entirely different set of thoughts, beliefs, and set of values that are radically different from the past. That's risk-taking. That's seeing things that we don't even know exist right now. So in our book, and slide 3, the next slide, please, we provide steps that lead transformation for our schools. We believe that being culturally proficient requires each of us to modify our core beliefs and long-term behaviors, but by first being reflective, being internal. What do I need to do to strive for equitable education? Not what others have to do, but what I have to do. In the early 2000s, Michael Fullan said it best, that we have to have the moral imperative to change because we are outraged. Each of us in this room is outraged that there are students still not being served well, but we know there's ways to do it differently. And so that moral imperative is to address that outrage with specific actions. If we want to serve students, as they say in most district missions, all students, but then when we look at our data, it's not all students being served, we have to be honest about that. What is causing that? The moral imperative of bettering the lives of students is absolutely the why of our book and the why of our work. In the book, you'll see several case studies that each of us has written from our own context that talks about how we actually took a problem of practice and actually through that equity lens made a difference in children's lives. And so these case studies share this work from different contexts, as I said, but also provides you an opportunity to analyze what we did across the continuum that Carmella shared with you, so that you can spend time thinking, oh, what's my problem of practice now? How am I going to change this? And what do I need to do to really have a different environment for our students? As I said earlier, the several years have provided several inflection points for us to be activism, I'll say, in our work to improve students' lives, anti-racism, criminal justice reform, immigration reform, rights for LGBTQ+, Black Lives Matters, the Me Too movement, the cry for more social and emotional learning for students, and much more are at the forefront of the work we need to do every day to improve what we do and to take actions to make a difference in children's lives. As I said, these inflection points really now call for an urgent call for equity. And not just equity in that I'm saying it's about a small portion, but equity in everything that we do. And that, as I said, starts with our own self-examination. We take you through a prompt to ask yourself 3 questions that continuously need to be asked all the time. Not, as I said, maybe I didn't say it, but what I want to say is that the cultural journey is not a destination. It's a lifelong journey. It never ends. It's a journey you're going to take for life, and you're continually going to get better, and you're going to find yourself not knowing everything you need to know and not having the skill that you need to have, but being honest about where you are. So when you talk about knowledge, you have to ask yourself, what do I already know? And then what do I need to do? For example, do I really know my students? Or do I think about them in a certain way? Or do I have biases about certain communities? Have I taken to know their home environment, really know it? Or do I assume because they live in a certain area that that must be who they are? And to be culturally proficient, it requires me to know my students, my staff, and community very well. Not just making assumptions, but knowing who they are and what their needs are. And it's using that different lens to support our students. We give examples of what you need to know as well using data. That could be the first start, but that's not enough. So we give examples on knowledge of what do you know and what do you need to know. Skills. What can I do and what must I learn to do? And that little side right there, listening, communication skills. Am I able to have really courageous conversations about what I observe and learn from the data about our students? Do I engage everyone? Do I have that skill to facilitate that? We give an example about intergroup dialogue. How do I have those conversations where people feel heard? And I'm a good listener. I'm an active listener. I'm not coming in with I already know what to do because I may not know what to do. And the more people involved, as was shared by my colleague, the better the outcome will be. And how do I reframe some of these conversations to really change from a deficit belief system? Being culturally proficient requires leaders to have the skill set to engage diverse groups and beliefs and build cohesions. And leaders, we have to admit that we have a lot to learn, and we make a mistake, we have to own it. Those are skills in communication, language, being empathetic, compassionate, to really be a cultural proficient leader. The will. We're going to ask you to join us on this journey. Do you have the will and the heart to take the journey of cultural proficiency? As I said, it's not a destination, it's a lifetime journey. Am I willing to stand up to social justice? Stand up and be the voice who can't speak? Am I willing to not be silent when I hear things that are inappropriate or have a deficit belief? Am I willing to confront in a way that says, I'm not going to accept that anymore? In my community where I worked before county office, I would consistently hear those children. There are children. And my work was to actually tabulate each week how I heard it less and less and less over time, so that anybody who said those would be a shock to the system with anybody in the room after a year or two, because there are children. So do I have the courage to do that? Am I willing to do that? It requires leaders to have the will to engage different diverse constituent groups in these conversations. Not everybody's of a like mind. And that's what makes us very, very unique in terms of our free speech and the things that we can do in our system. But it really requires us, do we have the will to do that? Equity leaders communicate at a personal and collective commitment to do whatever it takes. And they have the skills of creating the conditions that allow for those conversations to happen, for trust and success to occur as well. The will is to start where people are and move them forward. And you'll have examples of how to do this and use those examples in your own context in our book. Please join us on this cultural journey. We look forward to working with you.
We look forward to any questions that you have. Just feel free to raise your hand or
it's going to be in the chat, Maria.
Put it in the chat. I'm looking in the chat.
Maria, if I can also comment, since questions is brought up, we have guiding questions at the end of every chapter of our book to help you along your CP journey.
May
What
take some time.
advice do you have untenured teachers who are trying to do this work? We understand sometimes that, as new teachers to the field, it may seem like a very steep hill to climb in some settings that you're in. But we're excited too by the fact that you're present. If you're a beginning teacher, you can start that work within your own classroom setting, and often work that you start at the classroom setting can emanate out and impact a grade level, impact a school. Darline or Carmella, either of you?
No, I think what you want to do if you're an untenured teacher and you're working with others is to find a colleague who with a like mind and begin to work together, even if you're across different grades. To have a peer and a confidant, someone to work with you, because it's going to be difficult to begin without support from your leadership. But it's always fine to find someone with a like mind to work with you, to talk about it, to check your own biases. That I think is being inclusive with this work, because there'll probably more people who want to do it but don't know where to start, and it's easier to join hands and start the work.
The question of
untenured teachers too, hopefully it would not be a situation of fear, that one is in fear of doing or saying something that is going to cause them to not be recommended for tenure. One can't approach their job that way. Hopefully, in their interview process, they have been asked questions, and they also have done their research on the district to see, is this a district that I want to work in, one that I feel I can blossom in terms of moving the equity conversation forward.
Maria, I like one of the questions that are kind of combined. If you want to read one of the challenges and the common challenge.
There's the first one that says, simply, it seems so simple, wondering how to apply this from a system perspective. And one of the challenges faced is having the right people who desire to be part of this journey. You may already be part of the group, however, they don't believe or see the need, even when presented with data. Boy, is that so true. How do you get this ignited? What do you recommend for this? And so I'm happy to start, or Darline, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk about the systems level, because that's the work that I did in Salt Lake City School District. Is I started with my board. I spent when I arrived, I knew why I was going there, and I knew what I was going to do based on what I had learned and what the board had wanted for me. And I began with them to have them understand that if they wanted to join and do this, they were going to have some important background foundational knowledge about what it was going to take to do it. So having the board understand what we meant by equity, defining that, deciding how we were going to approach it was critical to moving forward, because with the board then, in their, we had site-based decision-making, allocation of resources. With the board behind it, that's how we began our strategic plan, and being able to then infuse everything that we did with an equity purpose. Again, in the time that I have, I don't have, there's some case studies in the book, but at the end of the day, about 3 or 4 years later, because it was a long journey, it never ended, one of my board members sat next to me and said, Darline, I get it now. I understand why we're doing what we're doing, because at that time, I actually had data presented that showed that my English learners were on par with my English-only students in writing and in literature. That took a lot of work, a heavy lift for my teachers to get what they needed to do that, to work with families and their children. But again, it really starts for me as a superintendent with your board, your board, to make sure that they're alignment. And then you work with your principals. And as was said earlier, everyone's a spokesperson for this. And when you have some naysayers who don't want to do that, you work with them. You just continue to work with them because over time, they realize that you cannot be blind to what the experiences that other students are facing and feeling that they're successful. Like I often said to one high school teacher, I said, you're doing a great job with the first 2 rows, but your last 3 rows, you've got to do something different. Let's plan together. So I met with them and we talked about that. So you work with them slowly because it's more about, in my experience, more about their fear of failure than it is about not doing it or not wanting to do it.
The one thing I would add to what Darlene shared is that you have to have that commitment to stay with it, to be committed for the long haul. People within the organization will look to the leadership, and that's the superintendent and the governance team as a whole. They'll look to the level of commitment to stay the course. It's always a challenge when there's a belief system that it's the popular thing to do, but you're not going to be there for the really difficult work. And so I think one of the things that Darlene did is that she did that long term in Salt Lake. I did it long term in my last district, Roland Unified. Carmella did it in her districts. And so I would just say, people will trust you when they see that you're in the work and that you're transparent about the challenges, that you don't make it unrealistic in terms of what can be done in the first year or the second year, but that you're in it to accomplish that transformation within the system long term and bring the system in alignment with the goals that you've established, and that you've established them collectively, that you've brought everyone into that process. Anything else from Carmella?
One of the most successful ventures that I had in this was people feeling that they were being forced to do something. And so I totally went the opposite direction and just made sure that everyone had the same language to speak as we started. And we left it at that. And it finally got to the point after several years that either they were going to be told what to do, it was going to come down the pike, or they could design it and buy into it and make it what it could be to help students achieve their maximum. And one of the negative ringleaders said, I would rather we do it ourselves. And that was all it took. And so sometimes it does take some years, as you said, Maria, but at the same time, it's being intuitive and going back to Darlene's, knowing where people are, knowing what their belief systems and conditions are, what the conditions are for change.
Well, if we believe that all students can learn and we work towards that, then we also have, at least for me, I have the belief that all my teachers want to learn as well. And I have to start where they are. And I believe that in the time that I was there, it was more about fear of not knowing how to do it. It wasn't that they didn't want to do it, but it was that fear. So you have to overcome that fear with support and being transparent about the data and working towards that.
Making it safe for people to have these conversations, as Darlene mentioned earlier. People sometimes hold back because they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing and offending someone or being characterized a particular way. So the skill set of how you navigate those conversations, you need to really develop them in yourself if you're in that role of being the leader to bring people together. I see there's a comment here about the courage TIC to build such an inspiring rubric. Have you heard of the Stigma-Free Society in BC, Canada? Our school is working hard to become a stigma-free school using the resources found on this website. I love that. A stigma-free, I love that. That's what you want to create, those conditions where people can move forward. And if they don't participate, they can't move forward. I remember leading a group of senior individuals when I was senior deputy in LA, and I remember one person saying, I am uncomfortable in this space because I don't want to say something that is going to be misinterpreted. So creating those conditions, stepping back, that was like such a gift to hear that, because it would open up the door of how do we make it safe. Thank you. Great suggestion. I'm going to see if there are any other questions here, and then otherwise I'll turn it back to the people who have the free books to give out. Sometimes it is really a book that can open up someone. I mean, it's as my colleague said, use our examples. We can be the folks they can talk about, and they don't have to talk about themselves or your situation. It's so much safer if you have like a case story from someone else who actually lived that case that you can examine and, you know, take it apart and do an autopsy on it and decide, you know, how is it relevant to you or not. So we encourage you to do that, and just know we are available to support you in your work. I know Melissa has a contact for our group, and we're in the process of launching a website. So I know she'll make that website available to anyone who wants to reach out. We just very honored to be here, and just to know how many of you are in this journey with us.
We thank you, and saw one of the comments, stay the course. Yes, everyone, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us, and we wish you the best on this amazing journey because it'll transform your life as well as the students that you serve.